Welcome to Responsible AI in Action. I'm your host, Charles Dimov, CMO of AI, the leader in responsible AI technology. With me today is Conor Smith, Senior Partner at Narratives. Conor works with professional services and purpose-driven organizations that deal with highly sensitive information. That means everything from land planning to governance to lived experiences and community voices. Narratives focuses on high trust digital transformation. That means helping organizations build internal capacity while protecting confidentiality and cultural integrity. Conor himself brings a practical perspective on what responsible AI really means when the information involved carries real consequences. Welcome, Conor.
Thank you very much for having me.
Conor, absolutely. It is absolutely a delight to bring in somebody with as much experience as you do in this area. And on a topic that, frankly, is quite interesting to me, which is, sensitive information, which I haven't heard too much about. So, again, this is going to be quite interesting. So, Conor, let's dive right in. When AI touches sensitive information, the stakes change. In your work with narratives, you see a lot of this, right? So help me and maybe the audience understand how to define sensitive information, first of all, especially when it comes to, when it comes to and involves lived experiences or identities.
Sure, thank you. I think it's a great question, and I think it's a great way to introduce some of the work that Narratives does, and sort of how we leverage AI for it. So I'd say sensitive information is information that is at risk in some way. We've got environmental planners on staff who work with species at risk, or sensitive receptors in environments and stuff like that as well. And it's a similar kind of analogy I would go to. This is information that is at risk in some way when you interact with it, when you leverage it for different things or use it. So in our work, this usually means, as you said, lived experience, cultural knowledge and practice, individual or collective identity. We'll come across these inputs in various ways. They might be interviews where we're talking about traditional land uses. They could be cultural relationships or resource-based relationships that communities have that have been passed down from generations. They could be spiritual kinds of conversations having to do with creation stories, those kinds of things. All of these have bearing on whatever the broader goal is. What I mean by that is they're critical to achieving whatever goal the client has to make sure that it's communicated clearly and that information is handled sensitively. One of the things that we try to do, there's a tendency in the industry to compartmentalize concepts that we see. So wild rice, you might say, for some of our clients, wild rice is a critical thing. So if you're working on an environmental project, you might compartmentalize this, really define the boundaries of what we're talking about here. And mishandling that information, having to do with wild rice is artificially constrained by the fact that you've bounded this concept, right? You've
Mhm, mhm,
compartmentalized it. So if you're using
mhm.
AI to talk about wild rice and you say something that is incorrect, for whatever reason, there's a tendency to see it as, well, I've just affected the definition here. We'll fix that up real quickly. What we try to do at Narratives is to recognize that this concept exists in a web of different concepts. So we often say, that you can't talk about the wild rice without also talking about kinship. And you can't talk about wild rice without also talking about the practices associated with its meaning to the community or the individual. Kinship, culture, spirituality, those kinds of things. For
Interesting.
individuals, you might get stories that have to do with trauma, about loss. It could be a symbol of hope. All of these very complicated things. So the point is, mishandling this information has contagion effect over
Mhm.
over how it's represented. So you've really damaged this web of relationships. So it's really critical to us that we're handling it as carefully as possible. It's a bit of it's a sacred kind of thing. You said trust
That
based. This
is
is one element.
that is absolutely amazing. I've never really kind of thought of things as a like. I love your perspective on contagion. So, in other words, that accuracy in your AI is extremely important, and frankly, as you point out, that it can, yeah, you don't want that contagion. In other words, something else kind of coming in that isn't really the proper answer or defining the correct terms in it. Huh? I love that. That's That really makes a lot of sense. And specifically, kind of really talks to the fact that you do need AI systems which are highly accurate and really kind of, both accuracy and precision as defined by whatever organization or team or a group it is. Interesting. That's really good. So proceeding from that, many organizations at the same time, understanding that, yeah, we do need that accuracy. We do need that, a more responsible AI system than what we've seen so far. But a lot of organizations are still feeling a lot of pressure to move fast with their AI deployments and getting AI into their companies.
Hmm.
Now, this is especially true in terms of what we're seeing in the market today, right? In fact, as soon as you open up just about any media, somebody's talking about it, whether it's doing well or not doing well, and what's the ROIs, et cetera.
Right.
So in high trust environments, though, where does that tension between speed and accuracy really show up the most in your experience?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's very topical. Narrative's actually maybe a little late to the game released its own internal AI policy. I say late with an asterisk because we've basically been wrestling with this as a really important question for many months, basically since AI sort of came onto the scene. To say that it's been disruptive in our industry, so consulting, supporting communities, is a bit of an understatement. We rely on AI tools. I wouldn't say we rely on it, but we're leveraging AI tools for, analytical purposes, for advocacy purposes, research design. But we felt the pressure to adapt pretty early on, both from competition. This is something you can't afford to sleep on if your competitors are doing similar things, but also from our clients. In Indigenous communities aren't our only clientele, but certainly a large portion of our work is done with Indigenous communities. We noticed
Mhm.
immediately we started getting more nuanced or more deeper questions. We were approached to do work that we don't think we had seen before that seems to be informed by folks leveraging these tools to ask more intelligent
Mhm.
questions, to review our reporting using these tools. So, we definitely felt the pressure to adapt. The promise
Mhm.
here for sure is speed. You said, what's the balance between speed and accuracy? I don't know if it tells the whole picture. Like for some
Mhm.
companies, they're talking about using AI to shrink their workforce. I don't think that pressure is something that we're seeing on our end. It has more to do with being able to fill time with deeper, more comprehensive answers to these questions, more comprehensive kind of analysis. One of the key functions of our AI policy is to preserve human authorship legally. What is the legal
Oh, nice.
definition of human
Yeah.
authorship? And by preserving human authorship, we retain copyright over our work, which is then transferable to our client. If we cannot preserve human authorship, it means that it doesn't belong to our client. So this is a life or death kind of situation for part of why we needed to make sure that we were getting this AI policy right. So, pertaining to your question about what this looks like, this balance between, the speed and
Mhm.
accuracy as it pertains
Yeah.
to high trust environments, this is, I'd say, focusing on the fact that the AI shouldn't be steering the ship, that we need a person in control is doubly important in the context of, Indigenous communities who have concerns about data sovereignty, control over the full life cycle of their projects, all of the information. As such, we use AI mainly as a foil for thinking and those analytical sort of things. But there are clear risks in all this augmenting of our abilities to go deeper and all that kind of stuff, hallucinations, bias, the amplification of harms that exist in the training
Mhm.
material for a large language model. This is particularly critical when dealing with cultural material, sensitive material, as we've already talked about. One of the most obvious places to see the advancement in speed is we do a lot of interviews, oral
Mhm.
history, lived experience, those kinds of things. And it used to take, if you were doing manually doing transcription and analysis, it used to take anywhere between 6 and 10 hours of labor for every hour of interview time,
Yeah.
meaning it was extraordinarily expensive for our clients to be able to afford to meaningfully record all of this information. With
Mhm.
AI, there's a version where you can do this in half an hour, 15 minutes. There,
Spectacular.
it is, but we found that it's certainly increased efficiency, but we still need to take so much time and
Yes.
so much care reviewing the outputs because
Yeah.
more often than not, actually without exception, they need to be changed, they need to be monitored, they need to be adjusted. So although we're making those some efficiency gains, it's all after the AI has done its work, it's all on the defense to make sure that we're making sure that everything is represented properly, that nothing has been hallucinated, that those themes do in fact exist, and that maybe that the speaker intended for something to be framed in a given way. So yeah, it's we're fully aware of the efficiency gains, speed, so to speak, but also the importance of checking this stuff. Like
Yeah.
the protection needs to be there.
It's an interesting balance that you kind of talk about because that's very much that conversation that we've gone through many times over the, I don't know, decades about is it efficiency or is it effectiveness that we're really
Right.
after? And yeah, and that's a really really good point that you highlight. I mean, and granted, the efficiencies that we can appreciate from this new technology is spectacular. Again, going from 10 hours to like half an hour, wow, amazing, absolutely amazing. But then the human in the loop type element comes in to say, okay, now let's test for effectiveness, and that's also where that accuracy comes in, which is
Yeah.
extremely important on the responsible side to say, yeah, it's not okay for the machine to just make up stuff or to hallucinate or even to the human has to guide from where are you getting this information, data, et cetera, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't want it going out there just broadly and finding something and then it turns out to be, oh, that was actually kind of a bit of a nefarious site or not ideal anyway.
Yeah.
That's good. That actually kind of ties in nicely into my next question here, which is so uh, thinking about efficiency versus effectiveness, kind of here, the
Hmm.
Gen AI optimizes for probability and it
Yeah.
doesn't optimize for consequences, which
Hmm.
is maybe that effectiveness part. Why is this distinction dangerous when it comes to working with confidential information or maybe culturally sensitive narratives?
Yeah. 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 That's a big one.
Yeah.
Um, I find the term stochastic parrot equally humorous and instructive.
Stochastic parrot, I like it. That's pretty good. You'll have to
Yeah,
unpack that one for
the
us.
probabilistic parrot is or the stochastic parrot is the parrot that is 100% probabilistic in what comes out of its mouth, and it's a parrot because it's repeating what it's heard before. So it's both instructive, but I think it's also a pretty funny image when we're talking about this new Pandora's box of Gen AI. But I think there are two issues with probability-based systems when reflecting on this sort of analogy. The first is its training data, and the second is its bias towards affirmation. In the first case, you're talking
Right.
about, these parrots have been trained or they've been listening to the entire body, basically, of the human digital footprint. This means inequities of access and impact on the internet are reflected in the training data. There's no way around that. You're looking at Twitter, you're looking at Facebook, you're looking at, gray literature, you're looking at think tanks on either side of the political spectrum, and you can divide this up anyway with any progressive lens that you want to. You could be thinking about gender perspectives, racial perspectives, class, post-colonial perspectives. Any way you want to look at this, the fact is the information that these LLMs are being trained on is not representative of the population. There's not a proportional match there. So, also the internet is full of vitriol and violence and,
Mhm.
all those
Mhm.
hate. So
It
this is
is.
this is this is the parrot that we have. This is the body of knowledge that it's probabilistically based on. So on the one hand, there's a problem here in that there's no correspondence to consequences, you say, or no correspondence to
Mhm.
reality, to the
Mhm.
context that matters or intention. So it's really it should be treated with that. A lot of people ascribe human agency or the illusion of these things to very sophisticated models. They're ultimately just parrots. The second point has to do with the bias towards affirmation. So because it's probabilistic, it means that even really difficult questions that should probably not get an answer or should probably get a nuanced rejection of an answer in some cases. If there is a probabilistic connection that can be made, the LLM will produce one. So this is where I think hallucinations, we've heard a lot about, in more recent, more sophisticated models that are being released, the big names, sycophancy, you're
Hmm.
so smart,
Hmm.
you've done, this is what an insight this is. And, this is a serious problem, because in many cases, especially in our line of work, we're looking for some critical feedback in many cases. We're
Yeah.
looking, as I said, the most important use for us is as a foil for our arguments, in doing our work. So I think those two dimensions are really critical when it comes to thinking about the probabilistic nature of these tools versus consequence, or basically not having any correspondence to reality. Yeah, those need to be kept in mind for sure, to protect the material that we've been talking about, cultural material, sensitive material.
Yeah, that's definitely a good perspective. Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about some of the responsible kind of technologies out there. So
Hmm.
at comma.ai, what we talk about responsible composite AI technologies a lot.
Right.
This it kind of it brings both deterministic and the generative elements kind of together
Yep.
in a cohesive, I guess, solution. Now, from your perspective, does this technical architecture really matter where you need to build on trust?
Yeah, yeah, I think this is one thing that's really, really exciting. We're really pleased to cross paths with Kama, both for our clients who are, I think there's real opportunity for something like this to run some of their internal systems, but also for us at Narrative. So I really appreciate, there's the folks at Kama have tended to, I don't know if this is an official thing, but
Hmm.
they've tended to frame these two technologies as the left and right brain. And I've found this really instructive. The analogy I think goes quite a long ways. The right brain is this, creative, fluid side that doesn't necessarily prioritize correspondence to reality. That's the
Hmm.
LLM. And then, one thing, I was watching a video, I think it was last week, and I thought of this, that split brain experiments where they've actually divided the human brain by,
Yes.
those kinds of things, and they've
Yes.
deprived the right brain of what the context looks like. Anyway, long story short, the right brain is less likely to not answer, or less likely to, say I don't know, than it is to make
Hmm.
up an answer when
Hmm.
it's deprived of that context. And that,
Hmm.
again, the analogy keeps going. This is where hallucinations, fit that analogy quite well. The left brain, by contrast, is logical, limited, deeply grounded in an ordered understanding of reality. So the biological analogy to me
Yeah.
is quite clarifying. So
Yeah.
Kama has built something that leverages, as I understand, knowledge graphs, or graph theory.
That's correct. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
so deterministic, as you said, this is very much the right brain part of the analogy. I did some research on this after first meeting with Comma. I had understood that you've been at this game for a lot longer than LLMs have been around, and this technology has been used for decades.
Hmm.
I understand to its greatest purchase in medical context. So there was a niche diagnostic tool that was built on, deterministically coming up with an answer consistently every time based on the information. That is something that AI
Right.
cannot do today, not in
Hmm.
a reliable way, right? Because it isn't deterministic.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, this architecture matters a lot in the context of keeping trust with our clients. I think bringing these two tools together to work alongside, so thinking of them as separate but connected hemispheres of one
Hmm.
brain, is a
Hmm.
huge, huge innovation. It means a lot to be able to have that creativity, that fluid thinking, but also to be able to ground it. One of the disadvantages I understand, or I guess it's not a disadvantage, I guess it's an advantage and a disadvantage depending on what perspective you're looking at. AI is pretty low effort. You plug it in,
Hmm.
and what comes out comes out. Knowledge graphs need to be programmed, but I mean, we're
Hmm.
talking about ensuring the human element is plugged into these tools. What better way to have the knowledge graph be built out, or that knowledge base be built out, by having an explicit point in time where the human is in the loop to correct the process, to correct
Yeah.
the language that's
Yeah.
coming out. So I think it is sorely needed, especially as we see the consequences of unfettered access. Like you look at models or companies like Grok, where they've taken all the safety
Yeah.
wheels off of this thing,
Oh, yes.
and
Yes.
absolutely terrible things start to come out of it.
Hmm. Hmm.
And on the more benign side, all the other models being used in uh, in workspaces and stuff like that, you end up with the risks that we've already talked about. The hallucinations, the misrepresentation, the harm that comes from bias. So yeah, such a cool concept. I'm really eager to see how it grows in the future.
Oh, that's great. And I love the fact that you kind of, map this right back to biology. And, the interesting thing, as you kind of point out, is you're right. There's two different parts to the brain biologically, and
Yep,
frankly, same thing with this technology, this composite technology that brings both that deterministic and the probabilistic. Because the frank reality is there are times that you need one or the other. When
right.
you're trying to solve a math problem, you're not looking for the creative side of your brain to come up with
Sure.
a new formula or equation. You're looking just to use what you already know and just kind of go through it. Versus the other thing, which is if I'm trying to paint create a painting on canvas, I'm
Mhm.
probably not using my logical side quite as much. But yeah, anyway, so good point, and nice tie back to biology on that one. So let's my last question here, leading from that, one
Mhm.
important idea of this responsible AI is knowing when not to answer. And you kind of touched on this, right? Because that is so important. You don't want the analogy you kind of provided was the medical industry, right? You definitely don't want to be giving a doctor advice if that was just made up, right? And,
Mhm.
and to say, oh yeah, just do this procedure if the system didn't actually kind of find that and say, yep, this is actually accurate, it's correct, this is definitely the procedure to use. If the machine just sort of made it up or created it, then
Yep.
not a good thing.
Yep.
So pretty important knowing when not to answer. So you and I both know that ChatGPT, and we talked about this, it often does come up with the answers, even when it doesn't know it. And worse yet, it actually answers in a very convincing tone and manner,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
I think that's the part that bothers most people is that, you know what, but it sounded so convincing. It
Yep.
sounded logical,
Plausible.
sounded
Yeah.
exactly plausible. So three things come to my mind when I'm thinking about this. Refusal mechanisms is one, escalation paths maybe, and frankly, the third part is human judgment. Right?
Right.
Those three elements I think are pretty important. So, in your perspective, working in narratives, how critical are these three when we're working with highly confidential, sensitive information, risk intolerant information? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think this is a great. I mean, I think of it. We talked about the stochastic parrot a little bit. I think that there's this bias towards affirmation. So my understanding, and again, not being in this space technically, is that if there's a probability there, you'd have to have a pretty arbitrary cutoff if you're dealing with probabilistic. The nature of the machine is probabilistic. Where do you decide that a probability that exists between 2 points in a vector database,
Mm-hmm.
where do you decide that that probability is too low to issue a response? So there's really no easy answer for this as I understand it technically. So all we have right now to go off of, you mentioned those three things. All we have right now is that human judgment component. And,
Mm-hmm.
all of the discussion has been, and we've already talked about it, the efficiency gains from using AI in this kind of work. Everybody's focused on this, but I mean, there is an enormous amount of effort. We've also talked
Yeah.
about this. There's an enormous amount of
Yeah.
effort and loss that goes into confirming
Mm-hmm.
the fact that there is a lack of confidence in the output to the point where you need to verify any substantive fact that's put in front of you by an LLM means that there's a cost to this. So that's one element. I think that the fact that you can't have confidence that an answer that should not have been given was given, or sorry,
Yeah.
that you can't have
Yeah.
confidence that an answer that should not have that was given should not have been given, I guess I should say.
Yes.
You have to verify that. So that's all, you're approaching a tool. Imagine if you doubted that a hammer would actually be able to hammer in a nail
Mm-hmm.
every time you used it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not
Mm-hmm.
you qualify the utility of that tool. So, I think having mechanisms to structure a response in such a way that tells you. One of the most powerful things is, at least in my line of work, when all the time when I'm sitting with clients who ask me a technical question, and it happens in many meetings, I don't know the answer to that question. That's powerful because usually you're able to demonstrate confidence, a high degree of confidence in all of the other aspects of the advice that you're giving. And then when you say you don't know, it actually inspires more confidence because it implies that you know the information down deeply. I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
I play the same logic to this. I would respect it more if it gave me, I don't know the answer to that question more often,
Hmm.
especially for the questions that
Hmm.
really matter. So,
Yes.
one of the things in our AI policy, I forgot to mention in an earlier question, one of the
Yeah.
elements of our AI policy is that we ban it for use, at least on the typical AI models. We don't allow our staff to use it to make statements about Indigenous culture, to clarify questions about Indigenous practice, Indigenous language. All of those kinds of things are off the table. We're in early sort of phases with comma on that, but I think that there's
Hmm.
capacity for that to change, especially
Hmm.
if these
Hmm.
models are defined by Indigenous elders that we work with. So if we're able to, if the knowledge graph, that deterministic side, that I guess it's the left brain, so to speak, was
Yes,
was to be
that's right.
trained by somebody in the culture, it means that we'd have better guidance, recognizing that we always need to go back to the community, always need to go back to the source to confirm. We're not even going to try that with the AI models for the biases that we've already covered.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think not answering is powerful, especially in the
Yeah.
context of a tool that you have high confidence in. Otherwise, it helps to
Yeah.
inspire that confidence.
Oh, I completely agree. I think the fact that if the tool is able to come back and say, yes, I do not know the answer, or the database does not have the information, or whatever, my sources simply don't know, or is inconclusive, I completely agree with you. That actually increases your trust level on the times that it comes back with a positive answer and says, oh, here's the
Right.
answer. Then at least you kind of say, okay, you know what? It knows when it doesn't know, so it's good. So if it actually answered, that must mean that this is correct, and it is good. So
Yeah.
so yeah, good perspective from there. Conor, thank you so much for joining me. This was really quite a thoughtful discussion on responsible AI in high trust professional situations. That's great. You really brought a lot of perspective to the game here. It's great to get clarity on how organizations can adopt AI also without compromising the governance, without and specifically on confidential matters and high risk issues. So that was good. Conor Smith is senior partner at Narratives, where he works with professional services and purpose driven organizations to strengthen digital governance, build capacity, and manage sensitive knowledge responsibly. That wraps up another episode of Responsible AI in Action. In each conversation, we speak with leaders across the industry to explore what responsible AI really means in practice. We look at risks, the governance safeguards, and solutions that work today. Thank you again to the audience for joining us. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Responsible AI in Action.